My name is Emma Blake. I'm 28 years old, and I learned early that in my family, love came with conditions. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those bright, sticky spring days where the sunlight feels too cheerful for how you actually feel inside. We were all gathered at my parents' place for what Dad called a proper family lunch. Mom had made her usual roast chicken, mashed potatoes, her butter rolls that everyone loved except me. Not because they weren't good, but because every bite reminded me of all the times I'd sat at that same table, invisible, while everyone praised my sister. Her name is Rachel, 2 years younger than me, 26. The golden child. The kind of woman who could spill coffee on her shirt and people would call it charming. She had that natural grace, the kind that made people forgive her mistakes before she even apologized.
Me?
I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who remembered birthdays, who picked up groceries when Mom forgot, who stayed late at the office to send Dad's paperwork when he couldn't figure out his email. The background character in my own family. Lunch had been fine at first, normal, even. Rachel had just finished her master's degree in journalism, and Dad couldn't stop talking about it. "I'm telling you," he said, carving into the roast, "that girl's going places. You'll see her name in the papers one day." Mom smiled proudly. She's always had that spark. I took a sip of my water, keeping my expression neutral. Then Dad turned to me, fork in hand. "You could learn a thing or two from your sister, Emma. Maybe if you'd taken your studies seriously, you'd be doing something exciting instead of sitting in an office all day." The table went quiet. Rachel looked uncomfortable for a second, but she didn't speak up. She never did. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. "I like my job, Dad." "Sure," he said, chuckling, "but it's not exactly changing the world, is it? You've always been so practical. You should have dreamed bigger, like your sister." Mom tried to lighten the mood. "Now, John." But he kept going. "I'm just saying, Emma's always played it safe. Rachel takes risks. That's why she's successful." I felt something hot rise in my chest. The kind of anger that tastes like salt when you try to swallow it. I wanted to tell him that I did take risks. That I'd worked 3 jobs through college. That while Rachel was finding herself in Europe, I was paying bills. That I was the one who made sure she didn't have to drop out when Dad's business went under 4 years ago. But instead, I said nothing. That was my role, the quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who keeps peace no matter how much it hurts. After lunch, while everyone was laughing in the living room, I slipped into the kitchen and started washing dishes. Mom came in, drying her hands on a towel. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you know your father doesn't mean it like that." I didn't look up. He never does. But he always says it. She sighed, resting a hand on my shoulder. "He's just proud of Rachel. That's all." "I know," I said, my voice tight. "He always is." She hesitated. "You could tell him about the tuition, you know." I froze.
No.
Absolutely not. "Why not?" "Because it's not about that." I didn't help her to prove something. "But it's not fair," Mom said quietly. "You took out your savings, you gave up your plans, and he's sitting there praising her like she did it all on her own." I put the dish towel down and looked at her. "If I tell him now, it'll sound like I'm asking for credit. I don't want his approval. I just want him to stop comparing us." She looked at me sadly. "You've always been stronger than you think, Emma." I didn't feel strong. When I left that night, I drove in silence. My apartment was quiet, too quiet. I sat on the couch, turned on the lamp, and stared at the framed photo on my shelf. It was from years ago, me, Rachel, and Dad at her college orientation. She had her arms around both of us. I remembered that day vividly. She was crying after the financial office told her she couldn't enroll because tuition hadn't been paid yet. Dad had just lost 2 big contracts, and Mom's part-time job barely covered groceries. Rachel had come out of the building pale as paper. "I can't do this," she said. "They said I can't register without full payment." Dad looked helpless for once. "We'll figure it out, honey." But he couldn't. Not then. That night, after everyone went to bed, I checked my own savings account. Years of scraping together bonuses, skipping vacations, saying no to new clothes. $20,000, everything I had. I transferred it to the university account under her name. The next morning, Rachel ran into my room crying, holding her acceptance paper. "Someone paid it," she said. "They said it was processed overnight." I smiled and hugged her. "That's great, Rach. See? Things always work out." She never asked who did it. And I never told her. Because that's what family does, right? We sacrifice quietly. But as I sat there years later, staring at that photo, I realized something painful. No one had ever noticed the quiet things I did. The sacrifices didn't make me more loved. They just made me invisible. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. Rachel had just posted another photo, her standing on a rooftop with her diploma in hand, captioned, "All my hard work finally paid off." My heart sank. Hard work. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. Maybe I was foolish for thinking love would come naturally. Maybe I was naive for believing family meant fairness. That night, I wrote a letter, not to my parents, not to Rachel, but to myself. A promise that I would stop living in the shadows of other people's praise. I didn't know then that life was about to test that promise brutally. Because 2 weeks later, Rachel called, crying again. "Emma," she said between sobs. "Dad's in trouble." I froze. "What kind of trouble?" There was a pause. "The business," she whispered. "He lost everything." When Rachel said the words, "Dad lost everything," I thought she was exaggerating. She had a habit of dramatizing things, spinning small problems into catastrophes. But the next morning, when Mom called, her voice trembling over the phone, I knew this wasn't one of those moments. "Emma," she said, "can you come by? Please. It's bad." I drove to their house that afternoon, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The house looked the same from the outside: white porch, blue shutters, the American flag fluttering faintly in the breeze. But when I stepped inside, the air felt heavy, like a storm had passed through and forgotten to leave. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of papers. His hair, which used to be perfectly combed and pepper gray, looked disheveled. His reading glasses sat low on his nose. Mom stood behind him, wringing her hands in silence. "Hey," I said softly, closing the door behind me. He looked up, and for the first time in a long while, he looked smaller. "Emma," he said, his voice flat. "You heard?" "Rachel told me," I said. "What happened?" He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "The company. The investors pulled out. The contracts are gone, the accounts are frozen." I glanced at the papers: foreclosure notices, letters from the bank, past due statements. Mom's voice broke as she said, "We could lose the house, honey." I looked between them, trying to stay calm. "Okay, we'll figure it out." Dad shook his head. "There's nothing to figure out. It's gone. Everything I built. 30 years. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "What about your retirement fund?" He gave a hollow laugh. "That's gone too. I took it out to cover payroll last year. I thought it was temporary." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't want to worry anyone." "Anyone," I repeated quietly. "Or just Rachel?" Mom looked down. Dad stiffened, but didn't respond. I'd seen this pattern my entire life, how they'd shield her from reality, as if she were too fragile to handle it. When she failed a class in high school, they blamed the teacher. When she crashed Dad's car, they blamed the weather. But when I made a single mistake, they blamed me for not being careful enough. And now, even in crisis, the instinct was the same: protect Rachel, keep Emma quiet. "Where is she?" I asked. "Upstairs," Mom said. "She's trying to call some people at her job. She thinks maybe she can help somehow." I nodded, though I doubted she could. She was a junior journalist at a lifestyle magazine, earnest, yes, but not the type who could fix a financial disaster. I stood and started sorting through the papers. "Okay, let's make a list. What do we owe? What's the deadline on the mortgage?" Dad frowned. "You don't need to get involved." "I'm already involved," I said, sharper than I meant to. "This is my family, too." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Emma, I appreciate it, but I can handle it." "With what money?" He looked up at me then, and there it was, That flicker of pride, the same one that always made him push me away when I tried to help. "I'm not a charity case," he said quietly. I wanted to scream. "You weren't a charity case when I helped your favorite daughter pay for school," I wanted to say. But I didn't. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. Instead, I said, "Okay, then at least let me go through these with you." He hesitated, then pushed the stack toward me. "Fine." For the next few hours, we went through every document, every overdue bill. It was worse than I expected. The business debt alone was in the six figures. He'd mortgaged the house twice. Mom made coffee, but none of us drank it. Rachel came down later, her hair in a messy bun, eyes puffy from crying. She looked so much like the little sister I used to share secrets with. Only now, there was guilt swimming beneath her tears. "Emma," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have been here sooner." I shook my head. "It's not your fault." But part of me wondered, if she'd known how much I'd sacrificed for her education, would she still have stayed silent all these years? We spent the next week trying to find solutions. Rachel set up a GoFundMe for Dad's business. Mom tried to sell her jewelry, and I quietly sent in a few payments myself to stall the foreclosure. I didn't tell them, of course. That's what I did, fix things quietly. But things started unraveling faster than we could hold them together. One afternoon, Dad came home from the bank looking defeated. "They're taking the property," he said simply, setting his briefcase down. "Next month." Mom started crying. Rachel buried her face in her hands. I stood there trying to process it. Then something inside me snapped. "Why didn't you tell me you were behind this far?" asked, my voice trembling. Dad looked up. "Because you have your own life, Emma. I didn't want you to worry." "Don't give me that," I said. "You didn't tell me because you didn't want to look weak in front of me." He stared at me surprised. "For years," I continued, "you've made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like everything I did was second best. And now, when you actually need someone, you still won't admit it." "Emma."
"No."
"You sit there and tell everyone how proud you are of Rachel, how she's the smart one, the successful one. But guess what? She wouldn't have even graduated without me." The words came out before I could stop them. The room went silent. Rachel looked up slowly. What do you mean?" I froze. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Emma, don't." "No," I said. "Maybe it's time someone did." I turned to Dad. "Remember when Rachel's tuition got paid at the last minute? That was me. I used every cent of my savings. I skipped grad school so she could stay in hers." Rachel's face went pale. "You're lying." "I wish I was." Dad stood, his expression darkening. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I didn't do it for gratitude," I said, my voice breaking. "I did it because I thought that's what family meant." Rachel's lips quivered. "Emma, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. You never asked how it got paid. You just assumed the world would take care of you, like always." Dad's jaw tightened. "You're making it sound like we don't appreciate you." "Because you don't," I said. "You never did." He slammed his hand on the table. "That's not fair." I took a deep breath, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Neither was your lunch speech, Dad. You remember? When you said I'd never be like her?" He froze. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom whispered, "John," but he said nothing. He just stood there, eyes lowered, the weight of his pride pressing down on all of us. Rachel reached out timidly. "Emma, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," I said softly. "Just do better. Be the sister I thought I was saving." And then I left. The air outside was cold and sharp, cutting against my skin as I walked to my car. I sat inside, gripping the steering wheel, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. That night, I didn't sleep. My phone buzzed with texts from Mom, then Rachel, then silence. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. Because that's what I did. I kept going. But something had changed. For the first time, I wasn't doing it for them anymore. I wasn't going to fix what they broke. I was going to rebuild for myself. And I didn't know it yet, but life was about to give me a chance to prove exactly what that meant. Because 2 weeks later, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in years, an old college friend with an offer that would change everything. The call came on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on my couch, still half numb from the fallout with my family, a bowl of untouched pasta on the table and the faint hum of my fridge the only sound in my apartment. My phone buzzed, and for a second, I thought it might be Rachel again. But when I glanced at the screen, the name that appeared stopped me cold. Lena Martin. Lena, my college roommate, my old friend from business school. The one I'd lost touch with after she transferred to California for a marketing job. I hadn't heard from her in almost 5 years. I answered cautiously. "Hey, Lena?" "Emma," she said, her voice bright as ever. "Oh my God, it's so good to hear your voice. How are you?" I hesitated. "I've been okay. You?" "I'm great," she said. "Actually, I'm calling because I thought of you today. I just started a new position, project manager at a media startup here in Seattle. We're building a new department from scratch, and I need someone sharp and dependable to help me launch it. You popped into my head immediately." I blinked. "Wait, seriously?" "Yeah. I remember how good you were with logistics and finance. You basically ran our senior project alone. The pay's solid, benefits are great, and it's remote for now. I can vouch for you personally." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd been at the same small accounting firm for 6 years. It was safe, steady, boring. But this sounded like a door cracking open after years of staring at a wall. "Wow," I said finally. "That's unexpected." She laughed. "Good unexpected, I hope?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Good. Send me your resume tonight," she said. "Seriously, I'll push it through." When I hung up, I just sat there staring at the phone, her words replaying in my head. You popped into my head immediately. It had been a long time since anyone had said something like that to me. That night, I updated my resume, brushing off old achievements I'd long stopped being proud of. Awards, leadership roles, volunteer work, all the things I used to hide behind humility, as if playing small was safer than standing tall. By midnight, I sent the email. And for the first time in years, I felt a small flicker of something that wasn't resentment or exhaustion. It was hope. 2 weeks later, I got the job. The new position was nothing like my old one. Gone were the gray cubicles, the lukewarm coffee, the sound of printers and fluorescent lights humming overhead. The company Lena worked for, Next Phase Media, was alive. Young people filled the virtual meetings with energy, ambition, and that messy optimism I'd forgotten existed. I started as a project coordinator, managing timelines and budgets for video campaigns. It was chaotic but fulfilling. Every day I learned something new, not just about work, but about myself. For the first time, I didn't feel like the safe one. I was just Emma. Capable, independent, valued. Lena became my closest ally again. She'd send me encouraging texts after tough meetings. "You nailed that presentation." Or "You've got this, you're the backbone of this project." Those words meant more than I could admit. Because for most of my life, I'd been the backbone for people who never noticed I was holding them up. The first time my dad called after the blow-up, it was 3 months later. I stared at his name flashing across the screen, unsure whether to answer. When I finally picked up, his tone was softer than usual. "Hey, Emma." "Hi, Dad. How have you been?" "Busy. Working." He cleared his throat. "That's good." There was a pause, the kind that usually came before something he didn't know how to say. "Your mom tells me you got a new job." "Yeah. It's going well." Another pause. "That's good. Really good." I waited, but he didn't elaborate. "How's everything at home?" I asked finally. He sighed. "The house is gone. We moved into a rental a few towns over." "I'm sorry, Dad." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." He didn't apologize for his words at lunch or for the years of favoritism. But the silence between us said enough. It was the sound of pride cracking, of a man starting to understand that his daughters weren't who he thought they were. By summer, things had changed even more. Lena and I had successfully led our department through 3 major projects, and the CEO took notice. He called me during a company meeting and said, "Emma, your precision saved us more than once this quarter." We're lucky to have you. For a split second, I froze because I realized something strange. It was the same kind of sentence I'd spent my whole life waiting to hear from my father. Only this time, I didn't need it to feel worthy. That night, I treated myself to dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant. The air smelled like rain and grilled steak. As I watched the sunset reflect off the skyline, I thought about Rachel and how far away she suddenly felt. We hadn't spoken since the argument. She texted a few times, small things, "Hope you're okay. Mom's birthday's next week." But I never replied. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just tired. But halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed again. "Rachel, Dad had another bad month. They might need to sell the car. Mom's really worried." I stared at the message. Then another one came through. "Rachel, please don't ignore me, Em. I know I don't deserve your help, but they're drowning." I put my fork down and took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to delete the message, to let them learn what it feels like when no one saves you. But the other part, the part that still believed in compassion, couldn't. I called Rachel back. She answered on the first ring. "Emma? Hey. I didn't think you'd pick up," she said quietly. I almost didn't. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," she said. "But Dad's so lost, Em. He won't talk to anyone. I don't know what to do." I looked out at the city lights, my chest tight. "I can't fix his pride, Rachel. I've tried." "I'm not asking you to fix him," she said. "I'm asking you to come home." I sighed. "For what?" "Another family lunch." She hesitated. "No. For his birthday." I rubbed my forehead. "Rachel. Please," she said softly. "He's not the same, Em. He's quieter now. I think he regrets a lot." There was something in her voice, fragile, remorseful. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll come." The drive home that weekend felt different than it ever had. The familiar roads, the oak trees lining the street, they all looked smaller somehow, like they belonged to a past I'd finally outgrown. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Mom's new car, used, older, but neatly polished. She greeted me at the door with tears in her eyes. "Emma," she whispered, hugging me tight. "You came." "Of course," I said, smiling faintly. The house was different, smaller, simpler, but warmer. The chaos of their old life was gone. The noise replaced by quiet humility. Dad was sitting in the living room, a birthday cake on the table, candles flickering softly. When he saw me, he stood awkwardly. "Hey," he said. "Hi, Dad." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, he said something I'd never heard from him before. "I didn't deserve you." The words hit me harder than I expected. He motioned for me to sit. "Rachel told me everything. About what you did. The tuition, the payments, even the house bills last year. I don't know how I didn't see it. I guess I didn't want to." I swallowed hard. "You were busy seeing Rachel." He winced. "Yeah, I was. I thought I was being fair by pushing you harder. But I wasn't pushing you. I was putting you down." The air hung heavy between us. He looked at me then, eyes glassy. "I'm sorry, Emma. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't eloquent. But it was real." For the first time in my life, my father apologized. I nodded slowly, tears filling my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. Rachel appeared behind him, smiling softly, eyes red. "I told you she'd come." I laughed weakly. "You always were the optimist." We all sat down together. Mom lit the candles. Dad made a wish. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel lesser. I felt like someone who had survived, who had built something from pain, and come out stronger. That night, when I drove back to my apartment, the sky was clear. The city lights shimmered against the horizon. I realized something then, something small but powerful. Sometimes, justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes, it's just being seen after years of being ignored. And for me, that was enough. At least, that's what I thought. Until a week later, when a letter arrived in the mail. A letter with my name written in my father's handwriting. The envelope was plain. No return address, just my name written in Dad's familiar, blocky handwriting. the same way he used to label his tax folders or my lunch bags in grade school. It arrived a week after his birthday, and something in my chest tightened the moment I saw it. I sat down on the couch, turning it over in my hands. For a moment, I wondered if I should wait, maybe call Mom or Rachel, or pretend I wasn't curious. But curiosity and fear rarely coexist quietly. So I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper. No stationery, no greeting card, just his handwriting, pressed deep into the paper as though he'd been gripping the pen too hard. I could smell the faint scent of his aftershave, the same one he wore my whole childhood. Old Spice and something faintly woody. My eyes landed on the first line. Emma, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to write down what I couldn't say out loud. I froze. I know I wasn't the father you deserved. You probably think I favored your sister because she reminded me of your mother, but that isn't the truth. The truth is harder than that and uglier. I saw myself in you. The quiet, cautious, never good enough version of me that I spent my whole life trying to outgrow. I thought if I pushed you harder, maybe you'd become something more than I ever was. But instead, I pushed you away. My throat burned. I wiped my cheek, not realizing I'd already started crying. You were always the one who kept things running. The one who remembered birthdays, fixed what broke, held this family together when I didn't even notice the cracks forming. You didn't need my praise, but you deserved it. And when I found out what you did for Rachel, that you paid her tuition, I didn't know how to face you. I told myself you'd done it out of pity, not love, because it was easier to believe that than to admit I'd raised a daughter better than me. I stopped reading for a moment, pressing the paper against my chest. My heart hurt in that deep, quiet way that comes from grief mixed with truth, a kind of pain that doesn't scream, it just hums inside you. I kept reading. After you left that day, after you told me the truth, I looked back at everything you've done and realized I never once said, thank you. Not for the tuition, not for helping your mother when she was sick, not for the endless small things you carried for all of us. You were the strength we never saw until we didn't have it anymore. I know I can't fix the years I wasted, but I've tried to make amends in the only way I know how. Enclosed is something that belongs to you, and always should have. My hands trembled as I turned the page. Inside the envelope, there was a second, smaller folded paper, a bank slip. I unfolded it slowly. It was a transfer confirmation from his life insurance policy, naming me the primary beneficiary. I stared at the numbers, my breath catching. It wasn't an enormous sum, but it was enough to make me blink, enough to clear my debts, to finally start something of my own. At the bottom of the letter, one last line. Don't let this feel like payment for love, Emma. It's just a small acknowledgement of what you gave me, a second chance to be proud of you. Dad. I didn't move for a long time. The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the heater. The sun was setting outside, painting the walls with muted orange light. Part of me wanted to be angry that he waited until now to say all this, that it took losing everything for him to finally see me. But another part of me, the tired part, felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I folded the letter carefully, then read it again. By the third time, I was smiling through the tears. That weekend, I drove back home, not for holiday, not for a crisis, but because I wanted to. The small rental house where Mom lived looked warm from the outside, light glowing through the windows. When she opened the door and saw me holding the letter, her face crumpled. He sent it, she whispered. I nodded. You knew? She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. He wrote it the week after your birthday. He wanted to tell you, but he was too scared you wouldn't forgive him. I probably wouldn't have, I admitted softly. She smiled faintly. He knew that too. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking tea, talking about him. For the first time, we spoke honestly, no pretending, no excuses. She told me how after the business collapsed, he'd stopped talking about money altogether. How he'd started volunteering at the local food bank. How he'd spent the last months trying to become a quieter, humbler man. He read your sister's articles every morning, Mom said. But he bragged about you every night. I blinked, surprised. He did. Oh yes, she said. He told everyone at church you were managing a team in the city. He said you got that drive from him. I laughed through my tears. That's a stretch. She smiled. Maybe. But I think he finally saw you for who you really were. We sat there for a long time, sipping tea, listening to the faint hum of the old refrigerator. The air felt lighter, even in its sadness. Later that night, I found Rachel outside on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the sky. She looked up when she heard the door creak. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." She handed me a cup of cocoa. "Mom said you got the letter." "I did." She nodded. "He showed it to me before he sent it. Said he didn't want to die without trying to make it right." Her voice cracked on the word die. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how small she looked now. The girl who once seemed to shine brighter than everyone was just as lost and human as the rest of us. "I never thanked you properly," she said after a while. "For what you did. For everything." "You don't need to." "I do," she insisted. "You gave me a future. And I wasted so much of it trying to live up to an image Dad created for me, one you could never win against because it wasn't real." I think he finally realized that too. I smiled sadly. He did. We sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. The air was cool, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel resentment between us. Just a strange, fragile understanding. After a long pause, Rachel said, "What are you going to do now?" I looked out at the horizon, thinking of the check, the job, the letter, all the pieces of my life that finally felt like mine. "I think I'm going to start something," I said quietly. "Something of my own." Rachel tilted her head. "Like what?" "I don't know yet. But I want to build something that feels like me, not what Dad expected, not what anyone else thinks I should be." She smiled. "That sounds like him too, you know. The best parts of him." I laughed softly. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the parts of me he finally learned to see. When I drove back to the city the next morning, the letter sat on the passenger seat beside me, folded neatly in its envelope. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted toward it, as if to make sure it was real, that the apology I'd waited years to hear had actually happened. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like the girl who used to hide behind politeness and patience. I looked grounded. "Sure," I whispered to myself, "you'll never be like your sister." And then I smiled. Good. That night, when I got home, I opened my laptop and started researching small business grants. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to create yet. Maybe a consultancy, maybe something that helped other women who had been overlooked the way I was. Something practical, but built with purpose. I wasn't building it to prove anything. I was building it because I finally believed I could. Before bed, I placed Dad's letter in a frame on my desk. Not as a reminder of his regret, but as a symbol of what healing really looks like, not loud, not perfect, but honest. And for the first time since that awful family lunch, I didn't need anyone's approval to feel enough. Starting a business isn't romantic. It's messy, exhausting, and, in my case, full of nights where I stared at my laptop with an empty coffee mug and more self-doubt than I'd ever admit out loud. After Dad's letter, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something with the gift he left behind. Not just the money, but the meaning of it. He had spent his life trying to prove his worth through work, through success, through pride. I wanted to build something that wasn't about proving, but about helping. So I used a portion of the insurance money to create a small consultancy that specialized in helping women-led startups with budgeting, grant writing, and growth planning. I called it Quiet Rise Consulting because that's what I'd done my entire life. Risen quietly. At first, it was just me, my laptop, a shared co-working space downtown, and an endless stack of grant forms. But word spread quickly. Clients liked that I was patient, thorough, and realistic. Within 3 months, I'd signed 6 contracts. By month 6, I was hiring 2 part-time assistants. Every time I signed a new client, I'd whisper to myself, "You're doing it, Dad." Not to seek his approval anymore, but to honor the fact that he finally saw me. Rachel would call occasionally, always asking how the business was going. "I'm proud of you," she said once. Dad would be too. "I know," I said softly. We were rebuilding too, slowly and naturally, like two people learning a new language after years of silence. One morning, about a year after I started Quiet Rise, I received an email that made me pause. Subject: Feature request, local spotlight story. Sender: Harper Lane, Senior Editor, Seattle Daily. I frowned. Seattle Daily was one of the city's biggest lifestyle and business outlets. The message read: Hi Emma, I'm writing to request an interview for our upcoming feature on women entrepreneurs redefining small business culture in Seattle. Your story came to our attention through one of your clients. We'd love to highlight how you turned personal adversity into purpose. Please let me know if you're open to a meeting this week. Harper Lane. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My heart thudded in that strange rhythm that happens when something surreal begins to unfold. I typed back, yes, I'd love to speak with you. When the reply came just 5 minutes later confirming the time, I sat there for a long time, hands hovering over the keyboard. It wasn't lost on me that my sister worked in journalism too, that her name used to be the one attached to stories about remarkable women. But this time it was me. The interview took place at a cozy cafe downtown, the kind with brick walls and soft jazz playing in the background. I arrived early, ordered black coffee, and tried not to overthink it. When the door opened and the editor walked in, I blinked in surprise. It was Rachel. Not my sister, but a woman who looked almost like her. Blonde hair, kind eyes, confident smile. She extended her hand. Emma Blake. Yes, I said, shaking her hand. Harper Lane, she said warmly. Thank you for meeting me. I've been following your work for a while. I smiled awkwardly. Oh, I didn't realize my work was follow-worthy. She laughed. That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. We sat for an hour, talking about everything: my background, my family, the company, the meaning behind the name. I didn't share every painful detail, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. I grew up in a house where being quiet was mistaken for being weak, I said at one point. Now I know that quiet strength builds everything that lasts. She smiled and typed rapidly on her laptop. That's beautiful. When we finished, she closed her computer. One last question, she said. If your family were reading this article tomorrow, what would you want them to know? I thought for a moment. That I don't resent them anymore, I said softly. They did the best they could with what they knew. But I also learned that loving your family doesn't mean you have to keep shrinking to fit their expectations. She nodded slowly. That's powerful. After she left, I sat there for a while, stirring my coffee, thinking about how far I'd come, not in money or success, but in peace. The article went live 2 weeks later. It was titled, The Quiet Power of Emma Blake, How One Woman Turned Family Pain into Purpose. I nearly cried reading it. It wasn't sensationalized. It wasn't pitying. It was true. The photo they'd used was one Harper had snapped of me at the cafe, soft natural light, my coffee cup in hand, a small, calm smile. For once, I looked exactly how I felt inside. Whole. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop, texts from colleagues, clients, even old friends. But the one that made me stop was from Rachel. Rachel, just read the article. You were amazing. Dad would have printed it out and framed it, you know. I smiled. Me. He already framed me once, with that college fund speech. Rachel. Huh.
Fair. But I mean it, Em.
You earned every word in that article. I'm proud of you. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. Hello, I said. Emma Blake, a male voice asked. Yes. This is David Carter. I'm an attorney representing your father's former business estate. I froze. I'm sorry, what? We've been finalizing some posthumous matters, he said. Your father had a small secondary account connected to his old business assets that recently released funds. You're listed as the recipient. I blinked, stunned. That doesn't make sense. I already received everything through his policy. Yes, ma'am, he said. This was separate. He designated it for charitable use, but the trustee was instructed to let you decide where it goes. My hand covered my mouth. He continued, it's a modest amount, $35,000, but the note he left said, Emma will know what to do with it. After the call ended, I sat there staring at the wall, heart pounding. Emma will know what to do with it. It was like hearing his voice again. That evening, I called Rachel. "You'll never believe this," I said. She laughed softly. "You've said that a lot lately." Dad left another fund. He wanted me to decide where it goes. Her voice went quiet.
Wow.
"I want to use it for scholarships," I said. "For young women like us. The ones who never had anyone to believe in them. I'll name it after him, but quietly."
She sniffed.
"He'd like that." "I think so too." There was a pause, then she said, "You know, it's funny. Dad spent his whole life wanting to be remembered for his business. But I think the fund, what you're doing, that's the legacy he was supposed to leave." I smiled. Maybe it was never about being like him. Maybe it was about finishing what he couldn't. A month later, the John Blake Scholarship Fund launched quietly online. No big event, no press release, just a mission statement. For dreamers who work in silence and still find the courage to rise. I sent the link to Mom and Rachel. They both called me crying. Mom said, "You've done something extraordinary, Emma." Rachel said, "You made Dad proud in a way he never imagined." But for me, it wasn't about pride anymore. It was about peace, the kind that doesn't ask for applause, only acknowledgement. That summer, I was invited to speak at a local women's business panel. When I walked on stage, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even thinking about the crowd. I thought about that family lunch, that awful silence, those words that once felt like chains. "You'll never be like your sister." And they were right. I never would be. Because I wasn't supposed to be anyone but me. It's funny how life circles back when you least expect it. A year after launching the scholarship fund, Quiet Rise Consulting had grown beyond anything I imagined. We had moved into a real office. Nothing fancy, but bright and airy, with a single shelf where I kept Dad's letter in a small wooden frame. Every new client, every woman we helped secure funding, felt like adding another brick to something solid, something I could finally call my own legacy. One Monday morning, I was halfway through my first coffee when my assistant, Lila, popped her head into my office. "Emma, there's an email you should see." "Another grant request?" I asked, glancing up.
She grinned.
"Not exactly. It's from the Seattle Daily." My stomach flipped. "Oh." She stepped inside, tablet in hand. "They're planning a follow-up feature on the scholarship fund. They want to do a joint interview with you and apparently your sister?" I froze. "Rachel." She nodded. "She's writing the piece. The editor said she specifically requested it." I sat back slowly, feeling the air leave my lungs. Rachel and I hadn't seen each other in months. We talked occasionally, texted holidays, birthdays, polite, careful conversations that danced around the depth we'd once shared. "She wants to interview me?" Lila nodded again. Her email was very professional. Said she thinks your story could inspire women to understand that sisterhood can exist beyond rivalry. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stared at my desk for a long time after she left. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the idea of sitting across from Rachel again, or the thought that she might still see me as the shadow instead of the sister. The interview was scheduled for Friday at the same cafe where I'd met Harper for my first story. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, laptop open, coffee steaming, her hair tucked behind her ears. She looked different.
Softer somehow.
Not the polished, magazine-perfect Rachel I remembered, but a version more grounded. Human. When she saw me, she smiled nervously. "You look amazing, Em." "Thanks," I said, setting my bag down. "You too." There was a pause, that fragile space between two people who used to know each other deeply, but are learning how to again. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes," she said finally. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I figured maybe we both deserve a second take." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening.
"Yeah,
we do." We started the interview, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a conversation we'd been trying to have for years, but never had the language for. She asked about the fund, my motivation, my journey, but her voice wasn't detached or professional. It was personal, careful. At what point, she asked quietly, did you stop needing to prove yourself to us? I thought for a long moment. The day I realized that proving myself wasn't love. It was exhaustion. She typed that down, smiling faintly. That's really good. You can use it, I teased. She laughed softly, then her face turned serious. Emma, can I say something off the record? Sure. I'm sorry, she said. For all of it. For not seeing you. For letting Dad pit us against each other. I should have known better. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. I know, I said quietly. And I'm sorry too. For holding it against you for so long. I thought I was angry at you, but I was really angry at him, and at myself for letting it define me. Her eyes filled with tears. I missed you. I smiled, my own eyes burning. I missed you too. For a moment, the cafe noise faded, the clinking cups, the hum of conversation, and all I could hear was the echo of our childhood laughter. Two girls who used to share secrets in the dark, long before pride built walls between us. When the interview ended, she closed her laptop slowly. Do you want to grab dinner? She asked shyly. No articles, no questions. Just us. I hesitated only a second before nodding.
Yeah.
I'd like that. We spent the evening walking through Pike Place Market, reminiscing about old memories, how we used to fight over who got the last cinnamon roll, how Dad would pretend not to hear us whispering past bedtime. It felt strange, healing, real. At one point, we stopped by a street musician playing violin near the waterfront. Rachel smiled faintly. Dad used to hum this song, she said. I nodded. Every Sunday morning. We stood there quietly, both lost in thought. Then Rachel looked at me and said something I didn't expect. You know, she said, I used to hate when people compared us too. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Yeah, she said, laughing softly. It made me feel like I had to keep winning just to stay loved. Like love was some kind of competition. But it never felt like that with you. You didn't compete back. You just helped. And that made me feel even guiltier. I smiled gently. I guess we both thought we were losing something we never had to fight for. She exhaled, nodding. Exactly. The musician shifted songs. The wind carried the smell of salt and roasted coffee. For the first time, I felt the past loosening its grip. The article came out 2 weeks later, and it went viral, not because of drama or scandal, but because it was raw.
Honest.
Sisters rebuild. How forgiveness turned family pain into empowerment. Rachel's writing was tender and thoughtful. She shared our story without sensationalism, the favoritism, the hurt, the silence, the healing. She quoted my line about exhaustion and love, but more importantly, she wrote this. For years, I believed success meant being the one everyone talked about. I never realized the real strength was sitting right beside me, quiet and constant. My sister didn't just save my education, she saved me from myself. When I read that, I cried. Not because of the praise, but because it was the first time she'd truly seen me. The comments section flooded with stories from people who had lived the same dynamic, the overlooked child, the golden child, the complicated love between siblings. For once, our story wasn't just about us. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt invisible. A month later, we were invited to speak together at a local women's conference. The theme was reclaiming the narrative. Standing backstage, waiting for our turn, I felt a wave of emotion I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe. Or grace. Rachel looked nervous. I nudged her gently.
Hey.
Remember Dad's speeches at church events? She groaned. Oh God, yes. He used to make us stand in front of everyone and recite Bible verses. I laughed.
Exactly.
If we survived that, we can handle this. When we stepped onto the stage, the applause was loud. But the moment that mattered most was when Rachel introduced me. This, she said, gesturing toward me, is my sister, Emma Blake. The person who taught me that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one carrying everyone else. The audience clapped again, softer this time, not for noise, but for understanding. I took the microphone, heart steady, voice sure. For a long time, I said, I believed I was defined by what others thought I lacked. But I learned that sometimes being different from your family isn't betrayal, it's bravery. Because when you stop needing to be like anyone else, you finally become yourself. The room went silent, then erupted in applause. Rachel reached over, squeezing my hand. And for the first time, standing beside her didn't feel like comparison. It felt like balance. That night, after the event, we drove to the river near our childhood home. The water shimmered under the moonlight. Rachel sat on the hood of the car, swinging her legs, while I leaned against the bumper. You ever think Dad's watching all this? She asked quietly. I smiled. I hope so. He'd probably still find a way to tell you to dream bigger, she teased. I laughed. Probably. Then she looked at me, eyes soft. You know what's funny? What? You did become like me in one way. I frowned. How's that? You finally stopped letting fear run your life. I smiled.
Maybe.
But the truth is, Ratch, I never wanted to be like you. She chuckled. I know. I looked at the water, the ripples reflecting the stars. I just wanted us both to be okay. She leaned her head on my shoulder. We are. And for once, for the first time since that painful lunch years ago, I believed her. The river had always been a mirror for me. When I was little, Dad used to take us there on Sundays after church. He'd skip stones while Rachel and I chased dragonflies. I used to think the river remembered everything. The laughter, the arguments, the secrets carried downstream. Now, years later, standing there again with the cool air biting softly at my cheeks, I realized maybe it really did remember. Only this time, it reflected a woman who had finally stopped running from her own story. Rachel was heading back to New York the next morning. Her magazine had promoted her after the sister article went viral, and she'd been offered her own column. We'd spent the last few days together, helping Mom reorganize the house, eating too much takeout and laughing like kids again. But tonight, we'd said our quiet goodbyes. After she drove off, I stayed by the river a while longer. The moon was full, painting silver paths over the water. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Dad's letter. The edges were frayed now, the ink faintly smudged from the many times I'd unfolded it. I read it again. Every line, every apology, every bit of pride I'd waited decades to hear. Then I whispered, You were wrong, Dad. I was never like her, and that's okay. The breeze lifted the edges of the paper as if the river were listening. Back in Seattle, Quiet Rise had just reached its second anniversary. We'd grown to a team of 12 analysts, writers, consultants. The scholarship fund had already helped 17 young women enroll in college, 2 of whom had sent handwritten thank you letters that now sat pinned to my office corkboard. One of them read, No one ever believed in me until this. Thank you for making quiet people like me feel seen. Every time I read that line, it felt like a hand on my shoulder from somewhere beyond. On the morning of our anniversary celebration, I stood in the new office lobby, a converted warehouse with tall windows and plants everywhere. My staff had decorated with balloons and a banner that said, We rise together. Lila handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. A gift from all of us, she said, smiling. Inside was a simple silver bracelet engraved with 5 words. For the quiet who rise. I laughed softly, wiping my eyes. You guys didn't have to.
We wanted to, she said.
You started this from nothing. Now look at it. I looked around the room, at the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the easy joy, and for the first time, I realized that what I'd built wasn't just a company. It was a reflection of every woman I used to be, tired, invisible, but still standing. That afternoon, while the team celebrated, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello. Hi. Is this Emma Blake? A young voice asked nervously. My name's Carmen. I'm one of the scholarship recipients from your fund.
Oh.
Hi, Carmen. How are you? I just wanted to say, thank you. I finished my first semester. I didn't think I'd make it, but I did. I smiled. That's wonderful. She hesitated. I don't know if this is weird, but when I read your story online, the one your sister wrote, it felt like you were talking to me. I grew up hearing, I'd never be like my brother. Hearing you say it's okay to be different, it helped me. My throat tightened. That's not weird at all, I said softly. That's exactly why we built the fund. She laughed a little. Then I guess it worked. After we hung up, I stepped outside the office. The sky was streaked with pink and gold. I took a deep breath, letting the city noise blur around me. That call felt like a small echo of everything I'd hoped for, proof that sometimes, when you heal yourself, you end up healing strangers too. A few weeks later, Rachel called. Guess who just got assigned a cover story? She said, her voice bubbling with excitement. Let me guess, another celebrity chef? She laughed. Nope. The feature is called Women Who Build Change. They want to include the scholarship program. And they asked me to write it again. I was silent for a moment. Rach, are you sure? I don't want people to think you're just writing about family. She laughed. Emma, this isn't about family. It's about impact. About the women you're helping. I just happened to be lucky enough to tell it. Her words warmed me. We weren't sisters trapped in rivalry anymore. We were allies building different corners of the same legacy. When the article came out, the photo on the first page was a simple one, me sitting at my office window, sunlight pouring in, the framed letter on my desk just visible in the background. The headline read, Quiet Power, How One Woman's Pain Became Hope for Others. But what made me cry wasn't the headline. It was the closing line Rachel wrote. Some people shout to be heard. Others whisper, and the world leans in. A few months later, the scholarship board invited me to give a keynote speech at a fundraising gala. It was held in a grand hall downtown, string lights, clinking glasses, polished marble floors. As I waited backstage, I thought of the younger version of myself, sitting in that family dining room, too afraid to speak. When they called my name, I stepped into the light. The crowd was bigger than I'd expected, donors, students, local officials. I found Mom in the front row, smiling proudly. Rachel sat beside her, recorder in hand, eyes shining. I adjusted the microphone, my palms steady. I grew up in a home where love sometimes felt like a scoreboard. I began. Where being compared meant being noticed, and being quiet meant being forgotten. But I learned that quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means patient. Quiet means enduring. Quiet means building while no one's watching. The room was still. When my father told me I'd never be like my sister, I continued, he was right. I never became her. I became me. And that's all I ever needed to be. Applause thundered through the hall. Mom wiped her eyes. Rachel mouthed, You did it. I smiled. We all did, I thought. Later that night, after the gala ended, I drove out to the river one last time. The city lights glowed behind me, distant but comforting. I stood by the water, the air crisp with spring. I pulled out a small envelope from my bag, the original check from Dad's insurance fund. I'd kept it all this time, even after depositing the money. It wasn't about the dollars anymore. It was about what it represented. I tore off a corner, letting the piece fall into the water. The current caught it, carrying it away until it vanished under the moonlight. Thank you, I whispered. Not for the money, not for the apology, but for finally teaching me the difference between being loved for what you give and being loved for who you are. The wind shifted. Somewhere, a distant church bell rang midnight. I smiled, watching the ripples fade. The next morning, Rachel sent a text with an old photo attached. Dad, Mom, her, and me standing by that same river decades ago, all laughing at something I couldn't remember. Her message said, You'll never be like your sister. You'll always be better, because you taught me how to be me. I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the photo until tears blurred it into soft colors. Then I typed back, We're both better now. That's enough. Months later, during another mentoring session with new scholarship recipients, one of the students asked, What's the hardest part about forgiving someone who never really said sorry the right way? I thought about it carefully before answering. It's realizing the apology doesn't have to fix the past, I said. It just has to free the future. They nodded thoughtfully, writing it down. When the session ended, I stood by the window overlooking the same city that had once felt so lonely and now felt like home. In the reflection, I saw the woman I'd become, older, steadier, maybe even a little radiant. No longer the girl who washed dishes in silence while her father praised someone else. No longer the daughter who mistook sacrifice for love. Just Emma Blake, daughter, sister, founder, survivor. A woman who learned that sometimes the loudest revenge is peace. Emma's story ends not in bitterness, but in strength. Her father's words, once weapons, become lessons. Her quiet sacrifices build a legacy of empowerment that outlives pain. She and Rachel heal not by erasing the past, but by transforming it. And in doing so, Emma finally steps into the light she built herself.